that to verify the order, or was that actually to
I
card you?
think it was technically card me because you are.
So what would he have done if you were 19?
I used to work for a wedding venue, and they used to print me when I don't drive it off, but I was 19 at the time, so it didn't work out.
Yes. Didn't see the arrow at first. I was like, oh man.
Oh. Alright, do a little behind schedule on organizing everything.
Oh, yeah.
Mark and Brian.
Hey, we should. I think you were
Well,
good the last one,
if you don't mind, yeah, I mean,
How do you lift them?
actually, so on one side or the other, each one has two little handles. They just pull up. Which releases it. One's closer to the side or the end, so they kind of stay close to
what?
it. Like that one for the power cords. So just be careful with that.
Oh, I think this one just. That one didn't.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Yeah, we'll just take this one out, or we can swap it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Now.
Pardon me?
I guess I should have unlocked the wheels.
Yeah. Probably helps. But it's not on mine either. Oh well, it works. Anyway. It's fairly frictionless. Alright. One of them did that to me earlier too.
How much room are they gonna need? More than this?
What's that?
More legroom than this?
I don't know. Just get them all out here and figure that out, I guess. Not sure how many chairs we even have.
Oh, yeah, it's on back there.
Thank you. Setting up water?
I don't think that'll be the case, though. Way. Yeah, you ordered Radical, I haven't seen it all. Radical might go away.
Hey Mark, thanks again for volunteering.
I thought y'all were setting up this table.
It's gonna be awesome.
Let's see. We only got a few presentations.
It's all good now.
It's really hard to get that down. I really only got to like 14 minutes.
No, that's, like I told you originally, like, my talk will be shorter than a normal talk anyway. Mine will probably only be 30 minutes.
We got
And so, yeah, that's perfect.
Wow, 15
Yeah, well, Corey's the first talk, which is about 20 minutes. And he has a couple of lightning talks, but those can stay here, depending on how everything else goes. Yeah, I think it'll be perfect.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be, I'm sure people.
Good. Those over here.
Yeah, thanks for your help, guys.
Yeah. Very useful.
Should we spread them back just a little bit?
Probably not, because we have about 50 seats here. So
Piece of
we're-
SRO, pizza grabbing.
Yeah.
RSVP.
No, it's definitely.
We always have a few no-shows, but hopefully it'll be pretty full.
We have to, there's more chairs.
I think this is plenty of leg room.
Yeah, we
for
might
the most
well.
part.
You're worried.
Yeah. All right, cool, that works. Good.
I wasn't sure what, no, like, so I was Yeah. I might dip out, I do have some writing to do or something.
Oh, no problem.
So like I might, then move you guys, right?
Great, if you can stick around just till we start, we can give you a couple minutes to.
And then after that.
Yeah.
And then I'll let you, move on, I figured I just told people for their part from here.
Okay.
There we go.
I personally think, like, having things as long as we can reach it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't.
You wanna do that?
Yeah.
We could- you could
Yeah, they
post
were
it.
on my list. They were definitely doing a big push a while back
Answer it correctly.
to get a lot of people in.
Are you sure?
Some of the stuff that we were doing.
Later versions.
Well, we need someone to get it
For
then.
the chat thing.
That's true. Or we could make it like, if they win the contest. we
Yeah,
can-
well, we're still working on it. We got
There's
If they
people
win
and
the
we're
contest, they can pick.
trying to move towards our goals. What do you do?
Well, I just got a gig for a company called
Yeah.
Awesome sponsor here.
I brought it.
Well, thank you.
Please bring it.
Just something I have.
Where's this from?
I've heard good things, I haven't.
What I've been doing was just
But
kind
I've
of
heard
traditional Java.
I got like an assortment of different things.
Service
too.
side.
Right on. Yeah, I did that for a couple of jobs ago.
Hey, Mark, did you want to try to connect?
Yeah, I was
So,
gonna try
either
that.
Mac
And I was
or
gonna-
PC?
And I was gonna try to
Alex.
solve over here because I'm pretty low, I think.
Mac is actually super easy because it's just the network, what do they call
What
it?
would you guys supposed to know?
What do they call their little magic?
Bleeding edge.
Oh, I can do that.
What's it called? Can you
Airplay?
Airplay, thank you.
Airplane?
Airplay.
Oh, Airplay.
Yeah.
So it's not plugging in. Well, I guess one of the things I was curious about doing was essentially doing
Yeah, I wish I could
The,
stay longer.
Other notes.
the speaker notes on mine.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. The AirPlay will, you can still go into the view options with AirPlay enabled, and you can say mirroring or not mirroring.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
I know.
you do have to be on the Capital Factory network to get on it, so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great.
Okay, so Capital Factory, yes?
No, you actually have to be on the rural network, not the guest network. And do you remember the password?
I just logged into the gas network, I can't remember.
It's the
Oh, did
factory.
it let you on here? Or did you connect directly?
I connected, no, I'm on Wi-Fi, I'm on the gas network.
It's the factory, just one word.
The
Just
factory.
I think they changed that, well,
Oh,
which one
really?
is it?
I'm saying, did you connect via HDMI or something, or did you?
Oh, yeah, I grabbed, oh, yeah, to get hooked up.
Oh, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, sorry.
Because to do AirPlay, you have to be on the authenticated network.
Yeah,
Right,
I'm fine
right.
connecting up with the connector. I think that's.
There's the adapter or the dongle too. depending
Okay,
on which
well, we can
one
do
you
that
need
too,
to-
either way. Shouldn't really affect what you want to do.
Yeah, well, I was just saying, if I set it up beforehand and I plug it in, we'll just go there. Can I,
Yeah, it should. So let's see.
let's try to-
Here, you can bring it over there.
Sometimes you have to switch to.
Can you help them out real quick? I'm
Yeah,
gonna make a
yeah.
quick
Yes,
phone call.
please do. Oh, it needs to be like one person to start, the floodgates open.
Oh, easy.
It's called tortoise. What you see is what you get. Let's see, pizza, bacon, apple, apple. Arugula. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Better potatoes.
Soda, I think there's water.
We got a bottle opener? I do.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the icons on desktop? I just close Finder usually.
Oh, here, I think I have.
There's a lot, so I don't know where the bottle opener.
Here, I got it. Oh.
You said close one.
I actually closed Finder, like the whole app.
And then, just so I know which way.
Oh, you're welcome.
Old oak and pie?
Yeah.
Where are they?
These are relatively close together.
Good.
I think so.
Mine is new places, I don't know.
Right, I like to do the delivery thing. I'm like, I don't know where they are.
Is there a guest?
Here, it's adjustment is food factory. Or less, yeah.
I don't think I'm getting emails for the Slack channel, so you may want to check that out. So I just invited somebody to post it on meetup, but there might be other messages. I just invited him.
Oh.
He's the one that reached out through the.
Yeah, you
meetup.
already invited him.
I invited him, but he's telling me that he can't find the live meetup channel, so
Maybe
I'm
that's
hoping
why
I
it's
didn't.
telling you nothing. But you might have to add it, I don't think you get added to it automatically.
Oh, gotcha.
So if he's never used Slack before, it's confusing. Oh, look, it's live. Other than that,
Oh. thinking it's gonna be like a minor video. We'll do that, bro.
We'll do this. Low tech.
Yeah. I actually have that on the first sliders. Oh, we'll still keep up there.
React. Good times. So I didn't get to go the year that I was working with, because they had office. Sweet deal. My printer was super broke. Shit. So did you get? No. I got it,
I've talked to him before. I went to the social thing that they had. Well, so there's two groups that both were sort of monks for a while.
Yeah, this one seemed like I only had one topic.
That's okay, yeah, so that's the other one, I guess. I don't know that guy. But then there was another one that popped up specifically because that one, phone person was. And they just had like a social meetup about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. At least, in fact, I think they just posted maybe something for their next one, I can't remember. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. Good one on to, yeah. No?
Yeah. It was pretty good. I mean, I'll sort of talk about, but it was, they didn't really announce anything first gathering like they did last year. So I think it was a little less exciting than after before from that perspective. But I think it was still good. There was a lot of good community input. Talks were, some of the talks were pretty good. Some of them, it's like in conference, very good. But they're all good. Had a lot of good people.
You know, actually, how quickly was the videos after that?
I don't actually, I was curious about that myself.
No, actually, it's better than Foundries. That was as good as
Speak up.
Yeah, I think it works pretty well there.
I haven't spoken in this room since this.
Yeah, I've watched a couple of videos that were recorded in here and they were you're fine. It's actually kind of nicer not having to worry about this with mics. That's true.
No, I'm open to, becoming familiar.
I did that last time too. I wonder if that's part
Have you?
I haven't used any of them. A bunch of similar systems, I guess, like
Then that would have been.
I've used React,
Oh, right, I forgot
I've
about
used
that.
React a decent bit, and basically like one or two web apps, but, I haven't used any of the similar systems, I guess, like Vue.js, Vue.
It's the latest cool thing. It's not that
So,
It's the one point.
I didn't know your name, sorry.
Daniel.
You
too?
No, Vue.
What is that?
It's, I don't fully get it. It's like an extra layer on top of it that's
Busy?
extra pretty and awesome and wonderful. I didn't quite.
Trying to keep up with everything.
Yeah.
It's hard
I'm just wrong.
Yeah, well, we're actually, so.
I don't think it's an extra layer on top of React, I think it's a similar system.
Oh, it's an alternative, you're
We're
right.
still on Node.
In fact, they have a lot, Vue.js has a really nice write-up, where they say why they're better than the others, but they sort of list out the pros and cons of all the
So it's a little bit painful,
front-end
but as you
systems.
can imagine, but it's.
Where you
it's
at?
good.
Like a lot of the.
No, I mean, it's just not
Just in general.
pain, it's just
Just
more like it's
plugins
very
to
time consuming,
mitigate.
going through all of our dependencies and
Right.
My
creating
personal opinion is it's like
mongoose
much more
and
mature.
everything, right?
Yeah, that was the thing, I looked at Vue,
But,
you know, I just
and
have
I
a
can't,
simple
I'm not the one
obvious
actually doing
website.
it. locally, so
And I
have
just
to
want
write
some help with
developers,
widgets and,
like,
and
the node
screen
file
layout and
guy,
so on.
What happens, tell me
It
what
looks
it's
like the
done.
widgets and things
If
for
y'all
Vue
run
are
into
sort of,
specific pain
you know,
points, please
more
reach out.
immature and not,
We can
not fleshed out.
See if there's any questions.
No, I think he's got it all figured out at this point. We've been sort of like slowly
One of the
doing
things
it
that's
the last
actually
couple of months.
hard,
So of course we have these massive branches
Just
that
the way
are
that
sort
it
of
does
like,
things,
you know,
like,
becoming problematic at
having
this
like
point.
an immutable
So the plan is actually, I think, next week, we're gonna finally try to merge everything back and like basically, you know, stop everything else from going and merge everything back.
Makes it hard to like use content
Yeah.
editable stuff.
Makes it what?
Well,
About
content editable,
released
editable,
yesterday.
like rich text editing.
Impressions, and so about seven.
which is, I think, one of the things they talked about at the React Conference. So,
Okay.
any similar system would have similar problems.
But I think,
Have is like,
you know, in his testing so far, everything's been working fine. And the reason
if
actually.
you were developing an application
Well,
that needed rich
we're
text
obviously,
editing,
one, is we're like years up the game.
Actually,
Yeah, it
Time.
didn't apply to me.
And number two, there were
I'm
several
still
specific
trying to
issues we were
figure
having
out
with
best
third-party
practices as far as Redux.
libraries that
Yeah.
required us to create.
Using
basically
some of
there's a
it's like
the
repository called React
dead
Redux
ended whatever
University.
branch, you know, we're on currently.
It's maintained.
And I can't remember the
Is that
exact
the-
issues at this
the
point, but
Survive.js
there's a
thing?
few libraries that, I think one of them was like.
Survive.js.
I think I've seen it, I'm pretty sure I've looked at it. It's like an online book on GitHub or something.
Queue management.
No, I was just thinking
I think
if there's
there's
like a
specific
Swagger
code
repository.
goal that we're dealing with.
Okay,
that's causing
alright,
us
yeah,
issues
yeah,
that
alright, now I know what you're
upgrade. I think there were a couple
Yeah, I
of
have
those.
you, I think I used.
Well, that was
There's
part
a
of it.
framework ones like that.
Yeah, I mean.
Basically like reference implementation.
For a couple of years, I don't know.
Yeah, it was, I think I started using that one.
Well, it's one of those things, you know, when.
Seems like it was missing a
12 came
couple of
out,
things that I wanted to
we looked
stick in
at it,
there,
and there were a
like-
lot of issues.
Every framework I
Time,
found was like,
well,
okay, it's got this and
not
this, but
well.
then it's missing this, or it includes this that I don't
14,
want.
yes, was it dot 14?
Yeah, I'm like new to all these
Yeah, I think that's
technologies,
what it was, we
so
were like waiting for like the next stable version like that, and then of course all
I
that.
was,
stuff
like I said,
happened,
trying to
and
figure
so
out
we're just like, all
some
right,
of the,
we got bigger fish to fry.
Tricky thing
Yeah,
is
let
routers
those
being
run.
yeah.
Add to your
Then-
Hey,
The Redux router, I can make that work.
It is, I mean, we
I
haven't.
was doing a test app and then I would have like not used it.
Other than libraries now, sort of getting out of date.
Figure it out.
Yeah, there's, a lot of forms.
Yeah, some of the examples
That's actually
leave a
part
little
of
bit to be
the-
desired.
And also just being able to upgrade like NPM and like everything, you know, so. But yeah, we're right in the middle of it, so hopefully soon.
Oh,
good luck. A lot of
Yeah, light is at the end of the tunnel now.
Fun road.
A lot of it is
It's worth it.
basically designing like higher order components, to wrap your components in.
I hope it's not too much trouble.
Things in.
Well, it's not my trouble. It's my developer Todd's trouble.
Well, for me, it was like, kind of knowing where to, just dealing with, what is it, what do you call them, action creators. I'm like, okay, what is supposed to belong in an action creator? That's something I wasn't real clear on.
How it's.
This is the first time I've
Hmm?
used this version.
I mean, it's just like, you know, I was setting up, you know, parts of this, like, you know, is setting up the scope strictly belong to the producers, or is it supposed to belong in, partially in the action chat? I kind of, at some point I said, let's not optimize prematurely and just see what we get.
Yeah.
That's what I think we're trying to like that.
As long as I guess the
Previous company knows.
things are immutable, that's the real.
Yeah, I haven't actually used immutable JS yet. I just been using the spreads.
Yeah, I wasn't I was just doing what the Danny from what so I was just following what he did. I wish you would have gone into asynchronous.
Well, yeah, it was, they were on Python.
Because it's in the next
You haven't, so you didn't have an example action that was asynchronous, like.
Right.
There's definitely an older
I mean, that's in the documentation, that there's some holes in the documentation that you build in.
So we're about to get started. We had a bunch of RSVPs, so I don't know where everyone is, if it's traffic or if they're all across the way and mingling with those people, who knows?
They have better food.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I don't know. Our food and drink is pretty good,
pretty
so I
good.
don't think it's that. Thanks to our sponsor. We're going to thank her officially on the slides, but thanks, Laura, for doing that. Just wanted to, this is a little funny because I don't know if any of you have been coming to these or not, but Capital Factory has been using, what is it called, Life Size?
Life Size.
I've been using this service called Life Size for their videos for a long time. And then without really telling us, at some point they switched over to hosting them on YouTube. And we didn't realize that. And so I don't even know how I saw it, but I realized that they had done that like a few weeks back. So I thought, oh, this is cool. And so I went and checked out the ones, our past meetups that they had posted. And actually, ironically, it was our last one that we talked about React, which, as you guys probably know, React is kind of a hot topic. And they had posted the video like 3 or 4 months ago and hadn't told us. And so there were all these comments on the YouTube video of like, you guys that recorded this video are idiots. You don't know what you're doing. The recording sucks. Like, you need slides that we can follow along. And they were just complaining left and right. And I was like, we do post our slides online actually, but since I had no idea that video was out there, I didn't, I had no way of posting the link. So I added a comment and was like, hey, sorry. But anyway, so this is for the YouTube people who got mad at us last time. We actually do have slides. You can go look at them right now and follow along. So with that, I'll let Corey actually get us started off.
Yeah, so it's edgeatx.github.io. That's the main page, and then you can actually get to everything, including the live stream from there. And for those that aren't already aware or haven't been sitting here seeing this, we've got a live meetup Slack channel going right now too. So if you send an email to bleedingedgeatx@gmail.com, Brian should get that. He can send you an invite, and you can chat with us in there, ask questions, that type of stuff. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started here. I guess just brief announcements here. There is a slide here in a second, but I'd like to invite you up here to talk about Hired here real quick, since I know you're on a little bit of a schedule. So.
Yeah. Hey guys, so I'm with Hired. Does anyone here know what we do or heard of us before? Okay, yay. That's good. That's okay. We're brand new to the Austin market. Well, I guess not brand new. We're about a year in now. And essentially, we are trying to change the way people find jobs. Yes, that is an incredibly lofty goal. But we think there's a lot of problems with finding a job right now. There's not a lot of transparency. It's kind of like shooting your resume off into an oblivion. You never hear back. You get down to the bottom or the final hour there, and salary doesn't line up. It's really obnoxious. So we decided to create a marketplace that instead fixes and alleviates a lot of those problems. It's a lot more candidate-centric, so it's companies applying to you, and they're going to come up front with information about salary, equity, all of those great things before you even get to talk to the company. So it's pretty cool. You get a coach, I would be your coach, through the hiring process, helping you in any way that I possibly can. We also, if you do decide or end up getting a job through our platform, give you awesome perks. You get a $1,000 bonus through us, and a box of Dom Perignon, a t-shirt, and a couple of other really cool things, which we're actually raffling off in the back. So I have your business card in there, or you could just like throw your name in, and I think we're giving that away later on. But if you have any questions about Hired or finding a job at all or hiring at all, I'm your girl, so come find me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right, so along those lines, is anybody looking for work right now? Yeah, okay. So definitely check out Hired. Anybody hiring at the moment? No? Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on then, unless there's anything you want to add for announcements or anything. The only other thing that I'll say right now is we usually will head down to Buffalo Billiards after the meet for more of the social networking aspect of stuff. So you're welcome to join us for that afterwards if you'd like. So I'm Corey. I'll be covering the bleeding edge stuff, and then we'll get into Brian's recap of the React conference. And we've got a couple of lightning talks. Unfortunately, 2 of those are mine. So if there's enough time, we'll do those. But we've got one here, Hip Chat on React one year later from Mark. So should be a good evening here. So I want to thank Capital Factory for the space. Normally we're actually in the other room, but they called us up about a month ago, and see there's a ton of people over there at the moment. So we're in here, and it'll all be live streamed thanks to Capital Factory as well. And then, of course, Hired here is responsible for the food in the back and the beer, so please partake. So with that said, let's get right down to the news from the Bleeding Edge. There's not as many updates this month as there have been in prior months, but we always start this off with the browser pop quiz. So I forgot to ask, show of hands, who's here for the first time tonight? Okay, a couple. All right, so welcome, guys. So what I like to do is ask, does anybody know what the current browsers are? The current versions. These are from last month. This was the January check. No? Okay.
Firefox still 44 until next month. I think March is 45.
Very, very close. Yes.
I think
Yeah.
Chrome 49 is still in beta.
Say again?
Chrome 49 is still in beta.
Yes, it is. He was talking Firefox, so there was a very minor update. 44.0.2 is Firefox's release, which you'll see in a few minutes. Doesn't really mean too much. But yeah, it's been kind of an interesting few months here because Chrome has gone through the stable and the beta releases have kind of blended paths a little bit just for this release. It's not that way for 49 or 50. You can see some more clear distinctions, but as of right now, we're at 48 still. And then Opera is at 35. The real big difference there is it tracks Chrome. Microsoft Edge, so version 10.586, we've seen this now for a couple of months. This is still the stable version. The Bleeding Edge version or the Microsoft Insider Preview version is at like 14 to something or another. And what I'm starting to see just in general is this version 10.586 has been referred to as version 13. The newer version you'll see is like 14 if you go to caniuse.com or some of those sites to see what's coming up with the browser. So if you have any questions about this, check out the Microsoft Edge versioning link on here that Brian did a couple of months ago. It gives a little bit more insight into why all this stuff is named this way. And finally, I made a mistake last month. Safari was not, it was a version 9.1, it was 9.0.1. Not that it makes a real big difference, the feature set hasn't changed that much, but just a correction from last month. So, and again, along these lines, Chrome 48, unprefixed CSS writing modes and min, width, and height fixes for flex items. And you may say, well, if you were here last month, you may say, didn't you see this same slide last month? And the answer would be, yeah, you did. The point here is that this is one of those areas where it's kind of blending over, where some things were like pseudo beta and now they're in the stable release. So just a little bit of that going on this month. But that said, there were a number of things this month, a lot of bug fixes. And I decided to put this chart together here just to highlight a couple things. $25,000 paid out for one bug fix. And then $7,500 for a couple and another $1,000 for a less critical one. But the only real point here is that Chrome is paying out a fair amount every month on these bug fixes, and this month there were a few more than normal. And the one that I'd like to bring your attention to, though, is the fourth one on here, the one that actually hasn't been rewarded, just says TBD, the fourth one down, for buffer overflow in Brotli. Now, if anybody was here last month, Brotli is the new compression algorithm that Google came up with. Long story short is it's basically supposed to beat the pants off of gzip from a compression perspective. So it's what's going into the browser now. Firefox has implemented this as well. They did that in the last version. But seeing some bugs popping up here and there is just something to be mindful of if you start using some of these features. That all said, Chrome does have one kind of new feature here. It's the font feature settings, so more of a CSS engine thing as opposed to JavaScript. This really focuses explicitly on open type fonts. So it is a special case. It's not something that a lot of people use, but I do know that there are several members of this meetup that do work with this stuff. So I've included it here. I think the important thing to note is like the second line here, the font feature settings of SMCP, that's small caps. There's a lot of ways that you can utilize that type of stuff. So with an open type font, which you wouldn't have been able to do necessarily otherwise. So an example of this in CSS would be small caps with the font feature settings of SMCP on. That's the one I'll demonstrate here. You can kind of you can see the. I'm sorry.
What does it stand for?
That particular, the SMCP,
Yeah.
Small caps. They do have several others, which admittedly I didn't dive into the details to find out what every specific element or every specific value meant, but it's not something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, but if you do deal with it, I would definitely go check out this particular feature. And just for an example, the first setting up here, you can see this might be a little small. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger here. All right, that's unfortunately probably the best I'm going to be able to do here. So the first one is just an open type font called Asimov that I downloaded. You can see it says plain. Nothing special about that. The small caps does exactly what you would expect it to. It puts everything into small capital letters. And the final one does fancy style. And you may say, well, this is kind of the same stuff that you can do with CSS already. And that's true. It's really just kind of an extension to be able to use the open type font.
What was the class definition of fancy style again?
Yes, good question. The fancy style one has a special, or it's a different open type font. And I'll be honest, I don't really understand. I didn't look up what the SS07 is. So that's really about all there is for Chrome of note for this month. In looking forward a little bit, next month's meet, there should be an awful lot going on. There's some cool things with CSS variables and a couple of other interesting features. So later this month, definitely pushing forward for the next versions, both 49 and 50 have a lot coming out in them. Firefox 44.0.2, this is the page. This is literally what I saw looking through things. Basically just security fixes, not a whole lot happening with Firefox. Opera, this one's interesting, but maybe not for the reasons that you would normally think. And just for those that aren't aware, Opera tracks Chrome. It is currently now, Opera 35 is based on the Chromium Blink release 48, the one that we've been talking about. And they've gone through and done some fixes, bug fixes, and a couple of features to the actual browser itself with bookmarks and things like that. More of a user experience thing, not the developer aspect of things. But the more interesting part about Opera is that this past month, a consortium of Chinese buyers bid $1.2 billion to buy Opera. I'll be honest, I didn't even recognize that Opera was a publicly traded company when I heard that. And so I looked into it a little bit, and basically the idea is by buying out the company, changing the direction a little bit, there's going to be more of a focus on mobile with Opera. So I don't know when all that's going to happen because the details haven't been disclosed other than a general price for the company. But that's kind of what you can expect from Opera, assuming that everything goes smoothly with this transition in power. Despite all that, they're actually working on a new desktop browser. Now, there's not a lot of detail around that yet either, but it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. The link on here just goes out to a Recode article about that. So it's kind of hearsay at this point. We don't have a lot of detail, but that's the latest with Opera. And then Microsoft Edge, not a lot of changes. Again, the version didn't change, but what's more interesting about that is for those that haven't seen it, Edge maintains a list of all the different features and allows you to go and vote on what you want. They have been Microsoft has been rather responsive to that. And the most notable one is that WebRTC is now under consideration. How many people in here are unfamiliar with WebRTC? Okay, very brief background on it. If you're familiar with sockets of any kind, whether socket.io, if you're a node person, or just basically being able to connect and have bi-directional communication with a browser. So not only being able to make a request to the browser, but being able to push information back. That's kind of what the socket.io world did, but the way that it does it is there's a server, a centralized server, and two browsers connect to that server, and the communication runs through that server. WebRTC is different in the sense that there's still a server in the middle, but it's a signaling server, where the connection is made between the two browsers, and it identifies those two browsers and establishes a link directly between them and then cuts off. So you basically have browser-to-browser communication, and this allows a lot of different things. There's a data channel, so you can do things like chat or whatever you need to send that's more text-oriented, but there's also an audio and a video link. So you'll see a lot of things. There's a couple of companies actually that if you go to any hackathons, I think Talkie is one that does Angel Hack, which I think is, I just saw that starting to circulate. So there are companies that are building around WebRTC, and it is available right now, but it's mostly available in Chrome and Firefox with some kind of, they don't quite jive 100% yet on the specs, but they are definitely getting close. And so with Edge moving into that space, it opens up a lot of possibilities, especially in the real-time world, for browser-to-browser communication.
What servers support that?
WebRTC,
Yeah.
right now, no servers. Well, there's the signaling servers are, but they're stun and turn servers. They're very similar to like a phone system. So the servers that most people use are the free ones that Google hosts right now, because it's just signaling. It's just like an addressing mechanism. Since there's nothing like that really today, people have been making different ways of creating a signaling server, because at the end of the day, it's really just saying what's the address of these two different systems and knowing how to connect them together. And so some people, there are a couple of implementations on Socket.io. You can get a raw stun and turn server if you want. Those, I'm a little less familiar with those. I can't give you a name, but they're definitely out there. If you look for those terms, you should be able to find something if you wanted to host your own. Any other questions on that while we're on it? Okay. All right, so.
I had one
Yes.
question about the browser news. So
Yeah.
I think like there is a competition, the 0-day competition, and Firefox is not going to be participating in that. So I think, do you have any percent?
Interesting. So, so the 0-day competition, is that what you said?
Yeah, I think it's called Own to Own, and it's a live competition for finding vulnerabilities in the browsers.
Gotcha.
So they said that Firefox, because it wasn't keeping with the latest security advances, it's not eligible for a competition. So only Microsoft Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, and Safari is eligible.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
It's not that Mozilla doesn't want to participate, it's that they're kicking them out of the club.
Right, yeah.
That's very interesting. All right, well, we'll say farewell to Mozilla from, at least for that part. So if any of you are on the Slack channel just like regularly, because we do this stuff offline as well, you may have seen some of this, but several things going away. .cloud is retiring in a couple of days. Anybody in here use .cloud or familiar with them, or no? Okay, their name kind of circulated around the beginning of the Docker era, but really what I've always known them for is they're the makers of Apache, which is it's based on Node, the Node proxy, Node HTTP proxy. And long story short is it's a way to set up a huge number of virtual hosts and be able to funnel them all through. So it's basically, it's a reverse proxy is really all it is, but it was interesting. I can't say that I used it all that often, but the technology was interesting and reasonably popular on GitHub. But I haven't seen any movement on that. I don't know what that project's, how that'll be affected by .cloud going away. But at the moment, it's a separate repository on its own. Since nobody here is using that, I'll just kind of skip the rest of that. But the bigger one is probably Parse. Who has not heard that Parse.com is shutting down? Okay, well, they're shutting down. It'll actually be retired next year. The official die date is January 28th of 2017. But if you go to parse.com right now, you'll see that the server is available. It's all open source now. So you can still get stuff, but they're just not supporting, the business is basically going under. And the final thing we could say goodbye to is SPDY or Speedy. This is more protocol oriented around HTTP, but as things die, other things start to grow. And the reason the Speedy is going away is because HTTP2 has been finalized. So the Internet Engineering Task Force has finalized the spec. This is already in Chrome and Firefox, so there's plenty of momentum on that. But that's really the replacement essentially, which was kind of always the path. It just wasn't very clear whether or not Speedy was going to stick around once HTTP2 became more formalized standard. The other thing is Atlas from Stripe. This is kind of interesting for anybody that is, sorry this is so faded out here. This is a screenshot of their website. Basically, so Stripe, who doesn't know who Stripe is? Okay, Stripe is an API for charging credit cards, essentially. It's a way to accept payments for your application. They've grown a lot. It's a pretty easy system to use, and they are growing their ecosystem a bit here with Stripe Atlas, which is sort of like a startup incubator. You probably can't read it here. It says, introducing Stripe Atlas, a new way to start an internet business anywhere. And they're basically providing a bunch of different startup tools for internet-oriented businesses. Under the caveat right now that they're focusing primarily on foreign companies. So it's a bridge to get into the US. That's where they're starting, but there is a kind of a vibe that they are going to open this up at some point to more folks, including people within the US. Some of the features that they include in this, now I'll just say right now the cost is $500. Anybody that's started a company, if you've had to use a lawyer, you know that $500 is dirt cheap. But basically covers the incorporation costs. They'll incorporate you in Delaware, help you open up a business bank account with Silicon Valley Bank, which is kind of the de facto bank of the Valley. Groups like Airbnb started with them and continue to use them. They're an interesting bank for a startup, and there is actually a local branch here just around the corner. So if anybody's interested in that, it's worth taking a look at. Of course, there's the Stripe integration, but then you can also get tax and legal guidance. So if you are a coder and have aspirations to be an entrepreneur, this might be interesting at some point once it becomes more generally available. The challenge right now is that it is primarily foreign companies and it is invite only. But if you can get into that, this is a little bit too big here. I can't really see it, but they're hooked up with a bunch of different incubators, including Y Combinator. They're hooked up with a lot of tech resources, specifically Amazon. And the Amazon one is probably of more interest to to developers in the sense that you can get $15,000 worth of Amazon credits for being a part of this program. Now that's something that if you've ever looked at Amazon just on your own, you do have to be part of an incubator to even be eligible for that. So if you want to get some free money to free servers beyond just that free tier that you can get on AWS, this is another way to accomplish that. And if anybody is interested, I know of a bunch of other things between Microsoft, IBM, so if you're looking for free hardware, software, that type of stuff, and you're an entrepreneur, come talk to me later tonight. I can give you some insights on that. So finally, I'd like to cover some libraries and frameworks of note. Really, the big ones are Node 4.3.1 was released, 5.6.0 was released. Again, kind of small. But that's the long-term support branch and the stable branch, and then ESLint 2.0.0 was released. And then these are not coming out very well, but this was just an ES 2015 cheat sheet that I found to be kind of interesting. So if you're working with JavaScript, if you're trying to get used to the new syntax and you don't want to be looking up every command, this was just a DuckDuckGo search for ES6 cheat sheet, and it'll bring up a lot of kind of everything in one consolidated area. So I found that to be kind of interesting and helpful, and maybe you will as well. And then I've got some upcoming events here to be on the lookout for. First one is the Dolby Audio Challenge is actually going on right now. They reached out to us and told us a little bit about the program. In a nutshell, if you can find a way to use the Dolby Audio libraries in your own web app in a creative way, then you can potentially win some money. First prize, 10 grand, second is 5 grand, 1,500 for third place. And then there's some other prizes for submitting early. You can win a Samsung Galaxy Note Edge or a Fitbit Charge if you submit by March 11th, a Jawbone Jambox by March 30th, and an Amazon Echo by April 19th. And again, these links are, they'll take you straight to the pages if you're interested in this. There's also DevOps Days Austin coming up. That's going to be May 2nd and 3rd. The organizer of that actually reached out to us as well, indicating a strong desire to get more of a local presence there. So if you're interested in attending or speaking, they are looking for speakers right now. This link can take you over there, and definitely give that a look. Of course, we all know the South by Southwest is coming up. That's the 11th through the 15th, but what you may not know is that General Assembly is offering a free 3-day workshop. Well, it's actually 3 different workshops on the 11th, 12th, and 13th. They're free. It's covering things like HTML, JavaScript. I think there may have been a Node one in there. I can't remember now. But again, free education if you're interested in it.
Why are they doing that?
I think it's mostly a promotional thing for them. It's just, there's going to be a ton of people in town for South by Southwest, so they get the exposure that way. And that's really all I've got here for the bleeding edge web parts. So we'll do a shift change here, get Brian up here, and yeah, that's it. So thank you.
Dealing with security on that WebRTC thing. How are you dealing with security on that WebRTC thing?
Well, there's what's that one called on there?
This thing is not the most stable thing to set up.
No, it's really not. It's all forced to go over SSL. You have to have an encrypted connection, otherwise it.
And I assume you have to agree somehow.
No, you don't, actually. You do need to, I mean, as an app developer, you really want to make These are into something.
I was just wondering, can you use it to what can you do? What can you do to somebody else's browser when it does it?
Yeah, you can't do much to the browser because it still has browser restrictions.
But you could probably show them stuff to make them do things like download crap or.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Feel free to continue moving around, getting pizza, whatever you need to do. It will not bother me. How many people, did anyone else go to React Conf? You're all here because you didn't go, right? Did anyone else go? No one? So I can say whatever I want, and you guys will have no idea if I'm telling the truth. Cool, did anyone watch the live stream of it? Any of it? Okay, cool. So they do post the videos. They posted the videos last year at a subdomain. I think it was like conf2015.facebook.com. So I assume it'll be 2016 version of that. But this is the current page you can go to that I'm sure they'll link to. So I would encourage you to check that out for the full content. So this little recap will be actually the good parts, as I'm calling it. Has anyone read that book by Mr. Crockford? JavaScript, the good parts. So obviously there was a lot of stuff talked about. Some of it was really interesting. Some of it was not as interesting. Quick review for the 2015 conference. Just a little reminder of what Facebook actually unveiled last year. So React Native. By the way, raise your hand if you are a React developer. Is it most everyone? A few people? So React Native is their mobile native, well, their web app development framework for deploying to native. That was really awesome and exciting. They also...
Can you zoom in a bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you zoom in a bit? Thank you.
They also released Relay, which is their way of sort of, it's kind of like automatic server to client binding for data, which is a really cool concept. And then they also, to go along with that, released GraphQL, which is actually more of a specification, but it's sort of how to query for data in a graph format, and it's designed to work really well with Relay. And this was all really exciting because for any of you that remember at the time a year ago, the entire ecosystem was more or less just React itself, the library. So these were all very exciting things that came out last year. And this is kind of how people felt about it at the time. It was very exciting. The next morning, if you've seen this movie, it's kind of how developers felt. It's like, yippee, a Zeppelin, it's so exciting, and it was all really cool. So now, new stuff for 2016. React Native, new paradigm for mobile development. Actually, I'm just kidding. But if you went to the conference or if you watched the videos, you'll actually think that they just released React Native as kind of hard as they're pushing it, which is not a bad thing. But I think, I got the impression, I'll say, that they are really doubling and tripling down on that strategy and really pushing it. So if you had any doubt whatsoever about trying it out or maybe going down that road for your own app, from Facebook's perspective at least, they're very serious about it. So that was very clear. Actual new stuff, so they did announce that React 15.0 is coming out next week. We sort of knew that because there was a blog post that links to that sort of talked about that it was coming out, but they officially announced that it's going to be shipped next week. It actually, didn't sound like anything too amazingly exciting other than no more React IDs in the DOM, which people were fairly excited about, and a little bit faster. And then there's a new component that came out. This came out of Facebook. This was actually pretty cool if you have a need for it. Obviously, a lot of people don't. But if you do anything with rich text editing input type stuff, you might actually take a look at this. It's very cool. And this was I don't know if it was factored out of or if they're actually using this now, but this was based on at least the code that they actually use on Facebook.com for all the, when you type in your comment and you get the cool drop downs to link to people and to add media and all that cool stuff that it supports. This is the component that, well, again, I'm not sure if they forked it or what they did internally, but this is essentially based on the work that they did to make that component. So that was pretty cool. And that was actually about it. Like, as far as the official stuff from Facebook, there was no groundbreaking new framework or anything like that. And so the next morning kind of felt like this. It's like, yeah, okay, I need underwear. It's all good, but it's not that exciting, right? So what's the deal? It was pretty much like, if you watch the keynote, that they pretty much spelled it out. They basically said they have 3 priorities for the upcoming year. Execution. Execution. Anyone want to guess about number 3? Execution. So, the point being, last year they came out with a bunch of new stuff. It was all very exciting. It feels like this year they're sort of taking a step back and they're trying to solidify the things that are out there, extend the things that are out there. As I mentioned, they're investing heavily in React Native, their phrase, investing heavily. And they talked about, Facebook folks in the past have talked about the concept of React being, learn once, write anywhere kind of thing. And they basically talked about now kind of moving beyond just React.js and saying that the goal is to build a platform around it, build an ecosystem around it. So when you factor in React Native and you factor in the client server stack, and they've got a tool called Flow, and they've got a bunch of other pieces that now really make up an ecosystem that didn't exist a year ago. And so they're really trying to build that out into a true platform. And their focus is on tooling, making debugging easier, the overall workflow about how you develop in React, the overall developer experience, onboarding, all that kind of stuff. So where's my new stuff? Because I really want new stuff still, right? Because I'm a developer. Well, there's no new stuff, but actually I think this is kind of a good thing. As I said, to me, it's a sign that the ecosystem is actually maturing. And even though it's not as exciting, that's a really good thing if you're a React developer. To give you a little bit of perspective, this is a tweet from Jordan Walk, the original coder behind React. And as you can see, he tweeted this, sort of said his small invention against all odds evolved into the thing that it is today. And even though Facebook had been using it, I guess, internally for several years before they open sourced it, but it was actually only open sourced in May of 2013. So if you think about it, it's only been around a couple of years, and React Native and these other pieces have been around less than a year, or just about a year. So that's a little bit of perspective, right? There are platforms that have been around 10, 15, 20 years, right? So the fact that React is where it's at today after only a couple of years is actually really amazing. And so it's a good thing that they're sort of committed to really building it out as a proper platform, really making it stable. They're working on execution of not only performance, like I mentioned, developer experience and all that stuff. How many people have heard of JavaScript fatigue? That term? A few people.
That's what it means.
So it's a blog post that a guy made just a few months back, complaining, well, constructively, I guess, complaining about the JavaScript industry as a whole, which has been happening for years now, but in particular, he was talking about React, and just talking about how, how tiring it is just keeping up with everything, keeping up with change, keeping up with new tools and frameworks and that kind of stuff. And he sort of coined this term JavaScript fatigue. And then, of course, in the past, since then, people have complained about JavaScript fatigue, because now they're tired of people complaining about JavaScript fatigue, and it's sort of on and on like that. But it's kind of true, right? There's definitely truth to that. I think we've all felt that as developers, that these tools move so fast that it really is hard to keep up with everything. So, I list that as a good point. It feels to me like Facebook is actually slowing down a little bit, sort of taking a breath. And I see that as a positive for the ecosystem. And finally, the community is still cranking out plenty of new stuff, right? I mean, in the past year, actually, I think React Router, I can't remember exactly when it came out. Redux came out, within the last year, and lots of other stuff. So there's still plenty of new stuff going on. It's just that Facebook Inc. itself has kind of slowed down a little bit. So that's basically kind of the overview of what I took away in terms of, generally speaking, like what's happening with the ecosystem. Now, as far as top talks, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and recap every single talk that happened. There were 11 or 12 hours worth of content, and you'll be free to look at all that when they post it. But my top 5 picks for things, if you only have a couple hours to catch up on those, the talk where they unveiled the Draft.js component was actually a pretty interesting talk. So he went in, the speaker dove into some of the technicalities behind the content editable browser component. It's actually a built-in native component to the browser that's been around for a while, but it's a very interesting, quirky API to deal with. And so he sort of talked about that and talked about how, even though a lot of people dismiss it, there are good parts to it and sort of how they address that. And broke it down basically how they came up with what they came up with, and then announced that they open sourced the component. So that was a pretty cool talk. And so I sort of ranked these. So this was the most interesting official announcement. The next one, Web-like release agility, was the most unexpected because this talk was actually given by a Microsoft guy, which was kind of surprising in and of itself. But then the stuff they're doing actually looks pretty good, which was doubly surprising. And basically, they have put out a tool chain that, well, VS Code itself is not specific to React. It's a sort of light IDE. They're sort of positioning it as kind of like a Sublime replacement kind of thing. So much lighter weight than Visual Studio, but supporting features that you don't get in Sublime, like breakpoint debugging and autocomplete of JavaScript. And then they announced with React extensions that you can download, you actually get autocomplete for JSX and for React components, React native components. So that's really cool. And then they also have Code Push, which is a service. It's like a kind of like a platform for doing deployment of like React native code, for example, to your devices, but allowing you to do side loading, which means basically pushing updates over the air without having to do a binary distribution to the App Store. So you can actually just push code updates right to your device. You can push beta builds, which is pretty cool. If you do any native development, you know that that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And they talked about future things they want to do too, like being able to do things like one-to-one deployment. So I could pick one person and deploy a specific version to that person's device, for example, and a bunch of other stuff. So that looks pretty interesting. If you deal with mobile, you might want to take a look at that. The talk itself was cool. The speaker gave a quick little 5-minute demo of pulling up that VS Code IDE and pulling up a project in React and showing the autocomplete, how it worked, showing how the debugging worked. That was actually pretty cool. So my pick for most useful talk was this one on optimizing React Native. If you do React Native, this was kind of a must-watch talk. And in general, it was actually an interesting talk because it was pretty detailed talk on sort of diagnosing performance issues and how to do that. But what's cool is I wasn't aware of these tools because I personally haven't done React Native development yet. But they have a set of tools that are made specifically for this purpose, and like that perf monitor tool is pretty cool. It actually runs on the device itself. And so, for example, in the simulator, like the Xcode simulator, if you're on iOS, you can pull up and run it, and you can simulate a shake on the device, which pulls up this extra little debug menu, and then you get access to this performance monitoring, which gives you RAM and frames per second counts as things are running, the number of views that are active, and a bunch of really cool information for debugging performance. So this was really, really interesting if you're into performance or if you're into React Native. Most impressive talk was on GL React. So kind of graphics, if you're familiar with like WebGL or any of that kind of stuff, this is basically the React and React Native version of that. So I'm personally not into like hardcore graphics in terms of like I don't do that stuff in my day-to-day job. But in terms of seeing the stuff that they're doing with these libraries and the visual things you can accomplish with it in JavaScript, I mean, it was pretty amazing. And the demo was really pretty amazing. So very much worth watching. And then he unveiled this last tool at the conference, this React Inspector for GL. And that was pretty cool because it was basically like the Chrome DevTools Inspector, but for debugging stuff with the graphics library stuff, the GL. So pretty neat if you're into that.
How are they actually doing? Was there a core concept or feature in there that's actually making that possible? What they're doing?
Yeah, I don't remember the details of that. So if you're interested, I'd recommend you watch the video. It was actually a very sort of in-depth video. And like I said, since I'm not personally a hardcore graphics guy, I wasn't following all the details of exactly how that's happening. So yeah, I would check it out. Most entertaining, so this one was kind of interesting. How many people have used Elm? How many people have heard of Elm? A few people. So I've never used Elm. I'd heard of it, was somewhat familiar with it. It's a functional programming language, if you know what that means. So it's all about, instead of in JavaScript, we have prototypal inheritance and all these patterns, and sort of like object-oriented based, the way a lot of people use it these days. But Elm is a purely functional language, which a lot of people, it's actually becoming kind of more popular these days, even with JavaScript developers. Elm is interesting, so it does transpile to JavaScript, so it runs in all the places that we like. Like I mentioned, they're all about pure functions, immutable data, which those things start to sound kind of interesting to a lot of React developers, depending on what you're doing. But a lot of React developers are sort of getting into the functional programming, largely due to like Redux and some of these things that have come out in the past year. And then they claim that when you're using Elm, you will basically never have a runtime exception, which is kind of interesting. And so the video, he kind of does a demo sort of explaining what he means by that. Because obviously in JavaScript, you get the infamous undefined is not a function all the time, right? When you try to call toString on a null or any of the thousands of things that we all do every day. And in Elm, when you're writing the code, you actually get, compile time checking that, essentially makes it impossible, they claim, to be able to create those kinds of exceptions. So it's kind of interesting. But all of that said, the fact that it's Elm is not what's interesting. It's actually that the guy who gave the presentation was an extremely entertaining and good presenter. So if you have interest in Elm, you should definitely watch it. But if you also just sort of want to see an entertaining presentation, it's definitely worth 30 minutes of your time just to kind of see the presentation itself and be entertained by the speaker. So I'm not going to go through every single presentation, but just a few highlights really quickly. This React's What Lies Ahead talk. This was a Facebook guy sort of outlining what they're thinking about with React. And the takeaway that I took from this was kind of interesting in that they didn't actually outline anything that was very specific. It felt to me like they were sort of throwing a bunch of darts at the wall and then maybe wanting to see what the community thought about that. And then they sort of ended with asking like, please help us out, please get involved and write code and that kind of thing. So that was kind of interesting. They didn't really lay out any kind of specific strategy about features that were coming out or anything like that. So that one's interesting just to sort of try to figure out what's in their head. There was this one called The Cartoon Guide to Data Handling. If you aren't too familiar with some of these libraries like Flux, well, Flux is their pattern for doing data management, but like Redux and Relay, if you want just a high-level overview of sort of the differences between those, this one is that. And it's also interesting because it's sort of done in cartoon format, which is different. So that's worth checking out. There was a virtual reality talk. I won't go into all the details of what was talked about, but this kind of cracked me up because over on the right there, is the guy who gave the talk, and then afterwards he posted this tweet that said, "My dad took this instant classic," and I guess they're on an airplane or something, and he has this VR phone contraption strapped to his face in public. So that's always awesome. But that was actually kind of an interesting talk. Well, if you're interested in VR at all, it was very interesting. So there was also a talk where this guy put together a hardware device in a briefcase that had physical buttons on it, and he wired together all this technology that's listed right here, which included React, and created a Jeopardy clone that ran on this hardware, Arduino Raspberry Pi device that he built. So that was like very specific, and it's probably not something that you would ever have a practical need for, but it was pretty interesting if you're into any of those libraries or whatever. They actually did lightning talks as well. So there were more lightning talks than just this, and I'm not going to go through all these, but these were ones that jumped out at me as being interesting things, interesting libraries, and other things that people talked about. So I'm not going to read all these, but if any of these topics sound interesting, then you should go definitely check out the lightning talk videos. For me personally, I actually do email templating quite a bit in my project. So this OI library was sort of interesting to me. And Gatsby actually as well. I've been sort of interested in static site development, but I hadn't gotten into that, especially in the React world yet. And so this library being designed to use React and generate sites from Markdown kind of looked interesting to me. But anyway, the rest of them you can look at if you're interested. And then this one was just sort of a good overview, another good overview of kind of app state management strategies and so forth. I posted it here only because I hadn't seen Reframe, which was talked about in here, which is a closure script library. So that one was kind of interesting. It's just another sort of alternative pattern for doing data management. And then Netflix gave a talk, which was, again, very specific. It was performance oriented. But it was kind of interesting because this is the goal that they set, was to be able to render in 60 frames per second with being able to render to screen in under 100 milliseconds and be able to support like a Roku stick, for example, that typically have processors that could be up to 465 times slower than the average, multi-core laptop. And so I thought, wow, I'm glad I don't have to develop my web apps with those constraints, right? Because this is what we're talking about, right? Everyone knows what Netflix looks like. So this is the kind of UI that they have to render with those as the constraints, which was pretty interesting. So they kind of talked about their strategies for doing that. And then there was a guy, this is not a Facebook thing, this was actually a Python thing, which was kind of interesting. So if you're into Python, you might check this out. So this guy basically open sourced Graphene, which is an implementation of GraphQL, and then Resolver is sort of a parse for that stack, sort of a backend as a service type thing. So if you're into Python, you should check that out. There was a talk on speeding up startup time given by a Facebook person. There was no code or library associated with this. It was more about patterns for how to do things. So like as an example, he talked about code splitting, stuff that probably a lot of people are familiar with, but splitting your dependencies based on what route you're going to go into your app and maybe conditionally loading code based on that and things like that. But it actually was pretty interesting because he talked about it in the context of what they actually do, like on Facebook.com. So it's always good to learn from people that support hundreds of millions of users on their apps. So I know that was kind of a whirlwind thing. If you have any questions about any of those specifically, you can definitely ask me. Like I said, there were other presentations as well, but if I didn't list it here, it was because I didn't really think this particular crowd would find it super interesting. And last but not least, this was actually not a presentation. This was just a tweet that happened during the conference. But if you know who Ryan Florence is, he's a pretty influential developer in this community. He wrote React Router, and he just published this thing, which is kind of like a boilerplate, but he specifically says it's not a boilerplate. So make of that what you will, but it's basically a starter project for kicking off new React projects and has a lot of best practices built into it and stuff. So if you're sort of starting out, that's maybe a cool thing to look at. So in summary, I felt like what I took away was that the ecosystem as a whole is really rocking right now. There was a lot of energy. Like I said, even though they've slowed down with the new fancy things, overall they're definitely focusing on the right things, it felt like to me, and things are feeling really good. Use React Native was the clear message that I took away from all the Facebook people. And they talked a lot about community building, contributing back to the source and all that kind of stuff. So that was definitely a big theme as well. And that's all I had. So does anyone have any specific questions about any of the talks or anything?
So with like,
Sorry, in the back.
You had mentioned Draft.js.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? I was trying to look up some information real quick. Do you have any? Did you get very familiar with it, or?
No, I mean, and there's not that much info on the site, so I didn't have time to like pull it down and try to play with it yet.
I didn't know how it compared to other kind of frameworks that were addressing the content editable, like Mirror or I guess Basecamp's got a project called Tricks, where they have an internal model that they maintain. You know, they basically use the content editable as a input and output mechanism.
It is actually managed that way.
Is it?
Yeah, it's an internal model that's reflected via React. The same way you do it. I mean, if you were to make it with like Redux or whatever.
You know,
the implementation that I saw was a little buggy, but I don't think that had anything to do with it. It was just.
You know, I think of the route where Mirror actually has different parsers and producers, so they can do DOM or like Markdown or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think they're, so I mean, they literally just open sourced it like as soon as he finished talking. I think they pressed the button to launch it on GitHub.
Oh, okay.
So it's still fairly new, and I doubt they have quite that much going on with it yet. At least, you know, again, at least what they've released publicly, which I'm sure is not like a exact copy of what's running on Facebook.com. I think the intention, because obviously if you look at what's on Facebook, as soon as you type, you know, certain characters, it prompts you and is like they're querying the Facebook graph for users and all kinds of stuff, right? So obviously this component's not doing all that stuff. So this is more like a, you know, a baseline type component that's intended to be extended and built upon by people. So I think the goal with it right now, at least, was just to provide a basic sort of React-friendly implementation that abstracts away all the content editable crap that you don't want to have to deal with, and just makes it play nicely with the way that React handles updating and everything.
Okay.
So I think it's, yeah, I haven't seen the ones you're talking about, but if they already have parsers for different types of syntaxes and stuff, I don't think this has anything like that.
Well, a lot of them are fairly fresh in terms of being released open source.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't have a chance to play with it. This is, you know, the conference just ended like 23 hours ago, so I literally, you know, it ended at 6 p.m. Pacific time yesterday, and then, you know, I flew home today, and between then and now I was sort of throwing this stuff together. So yeah, I haven't had a chance to get into all the details of everything. My goal was really just to sort of point people in directions of things that might be interesting to them. It's kind of my goal. Yeah, did you still have a question?
Yeah, so with like GraphQL and Relay, if you were writing like an API call, you wouldn't have to, I haven't actually read that much about it, but you wouldn't have to actually write like a database query.
Yeah, so it's not like, so the question is about GraphQL and Relay. So it's basically, the idea behind it is that data today is, well, Facebook in particular talks about data as a graph problem, right? As opposed to when we're writing our small little apps, it's typically like a select from some table, and it's a very simple model, and you might have parent-child or something, but you know, when they talk about graph, they're talking about taking an object that's related to users, that's related to friends, that might have comments on it, and it's like, you know, literally a graph of data, of disparate data models essentially. And yeah, the way that GraphQL I think is designed is that you're not like writing a SQL query, you're like basically specifying these are the nodes of data that I'm expecting, right? So you might give it an ID of a top level model or entity, but then below that you're essentially just specifying that you want to retrieve for that model this piece of data and this piece of data, and you're sort of building just the relationships between the things in the graph.
Yeah.
And then you send it off, and then if everything is working, your GraphQL server knows how to retrieve all that stuff and then send it back to you.
So is there like a specific backend for that, or is it?
Yeah, so basically GraphQL, that's actually kind of a big, that was a big discussion point in general, because there's still, after a year since they sort of published all this stuff, there's still not really, I don't think, a established, commonly used GraphQL server. That's one thing that they talked about as a goal, actually, in general, was sort of, there's a lot of different pieces of data management that they sort of have implemented or spec'd, or people have done things for, have solved it in third-party ways. And that was one of the themes they talked about, was sort of bringing all those things together and having one cohesive strategy, and actually, figuring out if GraphQL and Relay is kind of the approach, then actually making a real server that people could actually use. Because yeah, right now, I mean, you saw like the Python version that guy was working on, right? There's stuff like that in the community, but there's not like the official, hey, if you're using Node and you want to do GraphQL, do this. So that's not really there yet.
So in the spec, would it be ACID compliant, or?
That I don't know. Like that, you're talking like at the database level, in terms of how updates are resolved and stuff, and I don't know about that. That, I think that's, if I had to guess, I would probably say GraphQL doesn't necessarily spec that out, because that's more at the actual database level.
Yeah.
But I'm not really sure about that. Anyone else? Cool. Well, and I think Corey mentioned it, but we often go to Buffalo Billiards afterwards and have a beer if anyone's interested. So if you guys have any other questions, you can hit me afterwards. We also, since this was a React-oriented thing, we also brought another speaker to talk about React and how Atlassian is actually using React within HipChat, which is pretty cool. So Mark's going to talk about that now. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Let's see if I can get my cursor back. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm here to talk to you about how we have used HipChat, how we use React for HipChat at Atlassian over the last year. It's actually a little bit more like a year and 7-something months, but that doesn't look as good as the subtitle, so I figured I'd stick with 1 year later.
Yeah, I'm
Sure.
sorry, I don't know if you're gonna get into this, but I don't know what HipChat
Yeah,
does.
so that's a good start. So who is familiar with HipChat? How many people? Okay, so essentially it's a collaboration tool. People might call it a chat tool. It's kind of the same kind of thing, like Slack is another competitor to HipChat. It's basically team collaboration. So a lot of teams use that, especially distributed teams. But it is a something where a lot of messages are coming through constantly, presences, people leaving, a lot of stuff like that. So we started this, I guess, like I said, a year and about 7 months ago. I started about a year and a month, I guess, ago on this, and I am going to say stuff like I and we in this presentation, referring to the team, but because I wasn't there for the entirety of it, but that's just for context there. I also want to mention that I'm not going to be talking necessarily about React selling points. There are much better talks and presenters on that topic that I think you should look into. We think it's great. A number of us use it on other projects. But this I was intending to be a little bit more about the positive and negative experiences that we've had using it, like day to day. So I am Mark Lozano. I am a senior developer on HipChat, and you can look me up there later. This is basically what I'm going to talk about, which is the history of HipChat and when we started using it, some of the good things that React helped us coalesce around, some of the ways that we kind of violated the core React and Flux concepts and how that ended up in a bad place in certain scenarios. Ugly, I'd say maybe less about what's ugly, but more about what React doesn't solve for you. And then takeaways at the end, just kind of if you're going to be looking into starting something soon, things that you might want to consider. So, first of all, HipChat, we adopted React when doing a rewrite of our application. Basically, there were some big changes that were going to have to happen to the application, and we kind of had to make that choice of do we keep modifying what we had or pick something new. We did a couple of spikes with a few different libraries and frameworks, and there were a lot of really compelling reasons to use React. And if you want a little bit more complete history about that particular thing, there's a post by Rich Manalang from about a year ago, actually, that kind of goes into all of those reasons and what we were seeing it bring to the table for us. But important thing to know is it was super new. Like, they had just kind of gone public and said, hey, people start using this. This is really cool from the React side of things. But Flux was actually basically a slide in a presentation at that point. It wasn't a released library. There was no real reference implementation at the time. So we ended up rolling our own. So some of the things that I think React really helped us with, kind of by the way it's structured. It really helped us in terms of rethinking our application as a set of components, component level stores, and a series of state changes. Just kind of by the nature of how the Flux concept works, it sort of forces you to think of things in that way. It also kind of made us immediately think that if we're going to kind of follow that concept, that we really need to create an abstraction around our client server traffic, from REST requests to our XMPP traffic, which is essentially our messaging protocol that we use. And that was, I think, that paid off to be a really good abstraction to build early on. But it also kind of helped us think of making our components idempotent, or I guess the term that really has come out of React has been pure, making a pure component. And they actually talk about using something called the pure render mixin. They have in the past. There's kind of a new way of doing that at this point. But it's essentially playing into the nature of their algorithm for doing virtual DOM manipulation or diffing. So these things are ways that we kind of modified our application with React in mind, and they seem to have paid off in the time that we've used it, for sure. Some mistakes we made. React is a great library, but it's a library, it's a view library, and it doesn't put up any guardrails for you. So when you're using React and I think probably a little bit more specifically Flux, and trying to get your head around the kind of the nature of that concept, some of those Flux concepts can be abused if you're not paying attention, and that can undo some of React's selling points. So as a result, I kind of call this how we fluxed up. So the dispatcher is an element of, I don't know, how many were you that used React? Like maybe regularly or often or somewhat? Okay, so probably some familiarity with Flux. This diagram right here is kind of a really basic example of how that works. You know, you have actions that dispatch events that update stores, that update views, and then either things that go on the application underneath the covers or user interactions will create more actions that kind of start the whole thing again. And one of the things about the dispatcher is that it is basically an event emitter, and especially if you're building something from scratch, it could get really tempting to just use it as an event emitter. Just, oh, well, I have other events that are going on in my system, and sure, I'll just use that thing and fire off other events. But you really don't want to do that because then you're kind of crossing the streams between what's there for application state, which is really what it should be reserved for, moving application state through the Flux model to keep things consistent. You want to separate that out. So try not to use the dispatcher outside of the actions because it'll bite you.
Can you give an example of that?
What specifically?
Well, I mean, like an example of how you may have used it
Oh,
wrong.
okay. So I don't know. We may have any number of, let's say, man, that's a hard one to kind of come up with on the spot, but yeah, I might have to think on that and answer you at the end of the thing, at the end of the talk. So get back with me on that. Stores, another core aspect of the Flux model. Stores are where basically the state resides for your components, and you know, multiple stores aren't inherently bad. Right now, there's a lot of libraries like Redux that kind of are pushing towards the idea of having a singular store for all of your application state, which is great, and I think that works for a lot of people. But multiple stores aren't inherently bad. I think the problem that can happen is when you let them know about each other. And I think that in our case was probably another example of us doing the thing where we were crossing the streams with the dispatchers, and that was causing the rest to happen. So just another thing, just another place where if you violate the core concepts of it, you're going to feel a lot bigger pains than you might expect to in maybe another library. So what React doesn't solve for you, again, it's a view library. And there are a lot of things that it does well, but then there are other things that you still really need to be mindful for. And one of those things is DOM updates. React has a really awesome virtual DOM diffing algorithm. I think somebody on the Facebook team actually wrote up a description of how that worked, and it's really, really cool. But ultimately, you know, it kind of makes people sometimes think that, oh, well, I don't need to worry about updating the DOM because it's, you know, they'll diff it for me, and if it doesn't need to be changed, it's cool. If it does, it'll do it efficiently, and that's true. But ultimately, you really shouldn't let that allow you to become a bad engineer. So there's a lot of ways that you might not feel that at first for smaller applications, but as you start adding features to your application and it grows, if you're not paying attention to that kind of thing, you're going to feel it. So do stuff like minimizing DOM manipulations on that occur often. You know, if you know it's going to happen a lot, maybe kind of do some throttling or some debalancing of that kind of stuff. Clean up DOM elements for things that grow. For instance, infinite scroll lists. You know, if you're going to do something like that, you want to kind of keep those things as slim as possible, because ultimately React is going through the entire tree and asking questions. So the smaller you can keep that, the better you're gonna, the better your application is going to feel. Also, stores is where all the processing really happens in the Flux model. The stores are the things that listen to those dispatched events, and then they do some calculations or updates or whatever. And if you're doing large calculations in those event handlers, but you're the component that's tied to that store isn't on the screen, then you're basically just doing a lot of work that's contributing to minimizing frame rate or jankiness or stuff like that. So you just got to be mindful of that kind of stuff as well. And A/B testing. How many people do A/B testing in their applications? Anybody? Okay, so Atlassian does it. A lot of our applications, HipChat as well. It's basically the idea of testing out different workflows and concepts and UI elements and kind of user experiences in your application without having to implement that fully in the real application. There are a lot of tools around for that kind of thing. There are services like Optimizely that you create these basically projects to do those kind of things. And what they do is they inject scripts into your application at runtime. And a lot of people use stuff like jQuery or other DOM manipulation tools, or even just plain JavaScript to update the DOM to do those cool things. But messing with the DOM it makes React mad. If you start messing with the DOM elements that it thinks it's supposed to be in charge of, it's going to throw its hands up and walk away. So that can be a problem if you're not ready for it. But the one positive that came out of this when we were kind of running into this problem is a coworker of mine, Isaac, created this library called React. And it was for this exact reason. And what it does, which is really cool, is it kind of hooks into React's lifecycle methods and allows you to put stuff in the DOM so that React knows about it, the virtual DOM and the DOM, so that React knows about it and won't freak out on you. So that's pretty cool.
That header ended with React is evil.
Yeah, that's all Isaac. So yeah, because it's doing exactly that, right? You're messing with the lifecycle methods, which especially early on when we were first doing this, like nobody was really messing with the internals of how React worked. They're adding stuff onto it. Since then there have been a number of libraries that have kind of played around with that kind of thing as well. Not for the same reason, but for hooking into React's lifecycle and doing extra things.
So people are getting more comfortable with that now?
Yeah.
That statement, it's evil, did it blow up in your team's face at all?
No, not really, because it was mostly an internal thing. I'm not necessarily suggesting everyone go use that. I don't think, like Isaac didn't make a blog post and say this is open sourced, everyone start working on it. Though that could be great, and I think it could turn into something very useful if we did. But it was mostly an internal thing, kind of solve a problem that we had at the time. And there may be other ways to solve that same problem, but that can be done. So yeah, kind of lastly, if we're going to do it again today, with the knowledge that we have now, some of the things that we would kind of outline would be to never shortcut that unidirectional data flow, no matter what. Like when you're implementing stuff and you got to make it work, sometimes you're like, oh, if I just do this thing, then that'll make this thing work, and then I'll just check for that on the other end. Just don't do it, because it will bite you. Data management is huge. Everything about React and how it works is kind of based on the idea that you pass in data, and you render stuff based on that data, and if that data changes, you're going to render again, and then let React do its diffing. And if your data is not, if you're not consistent with how you feed it data, then you may not get the performance that you would want out of it. I'm not saying it's going to go wrong, it's just you might not get the performance you want. You're not going to make the best use of the tool, essentially, unless you're doing that. And Redux and Immutable are two libraries that kind of try to tackle how you deal with data in a more predictable way, I guess you'd say.
Do you guys use those now, or just
No,
would do it if you were starting?
We would do it if we were starting over. We have played around with Immutable. I think we actually have some uses of that in our application right now, but we're not using it to the extent that we would like to. And that's just time and features and bugs, and you gotta do what you can. And so we're iterating on that. But Redux is another one that's been on the board as this is something we want to look at and evaluate whether or not it makes sense to do for our application. So yeah, lastly, I just kind of to reiterate, it is an awesome view layer, but it does not mean that you don't have to think about how you build your app, because it is just that one piece. You still have to think about how you're building your controllers. You still have to think about how your data is coming in. You still have to do all the things that you would do when building an application. It's not a silver bullet, but it is really good at what it does. So, and kind of following up on what Brian was saying, React has changed a lot over this last year. A lot of really smart people are working in the React community, doing a lot of really cool things, and they're changing paradigms. They've been changing paradigms, hopefully not so much anymore, as we're saying it's kind of maturing, but there's a lot that's going on that I think has brought it to a maturity level that starting on a React project now is probably, if you do things like follow some of the best practices that are out there these days, like this particular blog post that I found. If you do those kinds of things, I think you're really going to have a lot easier time. Do those things, don't break out of any of those paradigms, and I think you're going to have a really easy time building stuff with it. So, any questions? Sure.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot as a longtime user of HipChat. Two things I would really like are editable posts and GitHub flavored Markdown support.
Yes. These are things that I have been asked for a while that we're.
I know I've voted on them many times too.
We are. These are so the way Atlassian works is we take in all of those things and we feed them into how we build our roadmaps. So I don't know where it is and where it is or has landed on the roadmap, but I know that those things get a lot of that has a lot more weight than in most of the other companies I've worked in the past. So I know we've done a few kind of attempts kind of spiking that concept for both of those things, but we're trying to give the users the best possible experience we can and not kind of shortcut it. So
And I know you can't answer it for real. I just put you on the spot a little bit, but consider that another vote for those things for me. So.
Absolutely. Well, we've wanted the same things. So
yeah.
I think that's part of why people spike it.
But we've been using HipChat for like a long time now, so we like it.
Do you think of an example?
Yeah, I didn't yet, but I will. I will. I might have to get back to you after.
All right.
But I will.
What are you guys testing in?
What are we testing?
Yeah, what are testing framework?
Oh, so we use Jasmine and we use Jasmine for our test framework basically. So for our unit tests, we do have some acceptance tests that we do with. What else? I'm forgetting it right now. It's common.
Selenium?
Selenium, yes. Selenium-based tests that we run for units tests. So. Anything else? Okay. Thanks.
I did want to ask, what do you use for your workflow?
Oh, well,
Like, do you use Webpack or anything like that?
Oh, you mean the tool?
Yeah.
Yeah, we use Webpack and Babel and Gulp right now. We kind
What's
of
the last one? Gulp?
Gulp. Gulp's kind of the task runner kind of thing that we
Yeah,
use.
I mean, I'm familiar with it.
But
The stuff that I was looking at, they kind of like didn't even use it at all anymore. They just used.
So we just have one more
Yeah,
quick,
yeah, that's
lightning
kind of-
talk from Corey, and then we'll be done. Actually, I'll just mention it now. I told Corey to mention it, but did anyone park in the building? So if you haven't, pick up a little parking validation card from the young lady at the desk right there, because otherwise, the last time I forgot to get that, it cost me like $25 to get out of this building. But if you have the little card, it's only $5, so make sure you get that.
Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, and then like I said, at least Corey and I usually head over and have a beer afterwards. If anyone's interested in chit-chatting, whatever, feel free to accompany us. Just 1 block over to Buffalo Billiards. And I think that's it. And then Corey's got this quick little talk, and then we'll be done.
If I can get it up.
And by the way, so we're always looking for speakers, even lightning talks and stuff. The last probably 3 or 4 months now, we've been doing this lightning talk format, which has been working out really well. So if anyone has a little topic, even if you only have 5 minutes to talk about something, if you think it might be interesting, just hit us up on any of the various channels we've got and let us know.
That's actually part of what I wanted to mention. This is a personal project. It's actually a combination of 2 things, front and back end stuff, but I just wanted to do something more personally to help encourage the community to get up here and talk about the projects they're working on as well. Excuse me. So recently I've been working on 2 projects, one called Chassis, the other called NGN or Engine. The chassis side is a front end thing, and I thought it might go over reasonably well with because it's not like React really. It's like Mark was mentioning that React doesn't have any guardrails for you. Well, this absolutely doesn't have any. It's really designed more for like if you know precisely what you want to do in your UI, this little library will help you do it. But ultimately, it gets back to the basics of things. Like I look at the definitions of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I feel like way too many developers over-architect things, over-engineer things. There's just you can do so much with each one of these things that it's really easy to do things you shouldn't do. So like just briefly, HTML is supposed to be a structured document. That's like the content that you're structuring. The CSS is supposed to be for presenting that, and then the JavaScript is for interacting with that content. So I call this I call Chassis the UI unframework because it doesn't really have a specific. Like it doesn't focus on like an MVC architecture. It doesn't force you to do anything, with one sort of loose exception to that. But there's a SAS layout engine, and this is actually my brother wrote this engine. It's based on topography, and if anybody hasn't really looked into that, it's neat because when you look at there'll actually be an example of this in a second. But when you look at your layouts, topography is a huge element of it. It's the bulk of the page most of the time. And so he made this really interesting SAS layout engine that will handle things like when the page resizes. So everybody knows of responsive design, but when the page resizes, does your text shrink? Does it expand? What's the padding around it, the buffer zones, all that kind of stuff. There are actual mathematical rules in the UI world that I personally, as a more back-end developer, don't usually pay much attention to. So when he showed this to me, I was like, this is awesome. I can do a lot of neat stuff here. It's also sort of BEM style stuff, meaning like it really focuses on the semantics of your code. And when you look at the code, it looks clean. So that's why we created the layout engine. There's a rapid prototyping kit, which is a bunch of web components, which for those that were here last month, that's what I talked about. I've got a couple of interesting things there. And then a functional JavaScript library. And this is the closest thing to React that I can think of as far as these components go. It's focused on an event bus architecture. So Mark was talking about the flow of data through a system. I look at an event bus in a little bit different manner, mostly because I'm not just thinking about it from the front end, I'm thinking about it from the back end as well. So this event bus, I'll show you an example. It'd probably be easier to show you an example, but it has a couple of other things. It has your typical AJAX and REST calls. HTTP calls really is what the library contains. And it has data models, stores, and proxies, some DevTools extensions we've already been working on, and it's extendable. So I'll very quickly show this layout system, and it is, oh, that's right, I changed the name of it. It's ugly on purpose, so you might be able to see this, but the page is just laid out here. This particular tag is called NG, or now it's called chassis layout. The code behind this, literally just this whole thing gets laid out for you. It's basically 3 columns, and then that third column is subdivided. And I'll briefly show you the code here for this. Let's see if I can get it up larger. So this is the code for that entire application, or at least for the layout of it. It's all based off of Flexbox, so we're not huge fans of the grid layout concept, since Flexbox kind of negates the purpose for a lot of that stuff. So that's what this whole thing does. Again, just a tag there that handles all that for you. Oops, I think. Yeah, okay. All right, and then it has a feature called references. So a lot of times, for better or for worse, when you are doing your own DOM manipulation or trying to reference different page elements, especially in a larger page, I use a lot of query selectors. I think a lot of people do. This ref library here will allow you to kind of associate a label just to store everything in one common reusable manner. So like in this particular tag, I've got an ngn-ref.create slides. That it just passes in a selector, the body looking for the first ngn cycle tag in the layout. And then that can be referenced later by ngn.ref.slides. And you can apply events to it, you can listen to events, you can do anything you want, just like a normal DOM element. The event bus is this ngn.bus. It has a couple of interesting things. Pooling of events is probably the one that is my most favorite. When you look at this thing, so if we look at the code here, there's 3 functions or 3 responders to events, nav.next, nav.previous, and nav.custom. And you can see that like right down in this line of code here, I'm just forwarding events from ngn.ref.next. That was a reference to the little button that actually makes these slides go forward. And I just forward that event, the click event, to the nav.next event, which is up here, and it just triggers the next slide. So that's kind of how the event bus works. Naturally, you can put multiple listeners on. This thing can get as complex as you want, which is why you have to be careful with it. But it is, in my opinion, pretty straightforward for tying data to components, reacting to different user interactions, all that kind of stuff. And then this looks like it's a little cut off here. Data models. This is the one that ultimately I've spent the most amount of time on, as in about 2 to 3 years, because I actually wrote this in Node first for the back end. It is substantial on the back end, using proxies and a whole bunch of other stuff to handle the change in fields. So like, for example, here you can see there's a couple of fields just defined a person as first name, last name, email. Well, you can load that data up, and then you can also recognize all changes. So if you change that object, say from the first name, from Corey to Brian, it will trigger an event. And that can be listened to on the bus. It can be listened to by anything else. It's just JavaScript at the end of the day. This also has, or I could always roll that back too. So like if I just said roll back 1, it would roll the name back from Brian back to Corey. So there's kind of some management in there of the data model for you a little bit. There's also attribute mapping, so if you need to persist this data, like a lot of my data stores, instead of using first name, last name, I use a lot of the originally, I guess it was Active Directory names, like GN for given name and SN for surname. So if you do need to map data, it's available right there. There's custom validators, there's native validators, there's indexing on this when you get into the data store concept, which you can store people, as opposed to just a single person or any collection thereof. And then there's virtual fields for things like here, calculating an age based on the user's birthday or something like that. So the data stores here, this is using that last example. It's identifying that there's a store of people or of persons. Doesn't allow duplication. You can add records. You can listen to those records. So binding to, like what I do here is like I'll listen to a store, and anytime a new record is created, if I need to say display that store in the web page, I'm just injecting directly into the DOM there. So Unlike something like React, which is doing diffing, I don't need that in this library. I just go straight in. I know exactly what is going to be inserted into the DOM and what's going to be pulled out. And it, to some degree, it kind of follows more incremental DOM approach, which is Google's take on all this. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's exactly like that, because this project is, overall, this particular one is about 6 months old, maybe not even that long. So it's not, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of everything, but ultimately, I found it to be really useful. I'm using it in commercial applications that I'm developing right now. I'm actually using it for data management applications, like an ETL tool. So it's been kind of useful for that. Let's see. Then I've got some tooling built around it. Do currently have a DevTools system. This just shows off the selector or the references. So it just gives you a list of everything that's in your application and what it refers to. I could show you this if you care to see it, but it'll help you find everything in your page just by hovering over everything. There's also one for events. I'm working on a more inclusive data model viewer for everything in your app. So I got some tooling around that. There's about 100 unit tests on this thing. There's an automated deployment pipeline. It's out there on JS Deliver, so you can use it today. It works in Node-like environments. I'm using it in Electron. It works in Node, or what was Node WebKit, NWJS as well. And of course, this is a personal project, so it's still in development. But you can check it out if you want. The main repo is github.com/ngn.js, and that includes what I'm about to talk about, as well as this whole front-end library. So ngn is the back end of this, and all right, it's not gonna, okay. So are there any I know that there's at least one or two back-end engineers, but raise of hands, how many people do back-end work? Okay, so a couple folks. I'm a big fan of microservice architecture, and kind of the whole event bus concept. Like I said, it resonates both front end and back end for me. This little diagram is just a mock-up of how a potential app could work, where you have a user interface, you're talking to a web server. That web server may be talking to an API server. That could be handled, or the logic of the API may be split up into different processes, so like RPCs, remote procedure calls. You split things all sorts of, 10 ways from Sunday with a microservices architecture. And I like the flexibility of that, but it can also be kind of challenging, especially when you're managing a work environment locally. So to combat that, I've created the ngn system is, there's an SDK, which is for your actual application development. That's all based on Node. It has many of the same features that I'd written into Chassis from like the data modeling perspective, the event bus perspective, but it also has rather complex logging capabilities. It will handle interaction between the front end and the back end for you, and does a lot of interesting things. I'll show you some code in a minute. The IDK is the infrastructure development kit. I built most of this stuff on Docker, and so you can deploy this very quickly if you're in a Docker environment. There's a piece called Bridge, which is actually part of what you're looking at with the tooling on the right. There's a web app that we've been working on so that you can log in and actually see your entire network, your entire microservices system in one screen, and then be able to drill down into all the different applications, how they're interacting. So that's what we're working on right now. The bottom screenshot there is the documentation tool. That's a desktop tool that I've been working on, again, to just document all this stuff. So sorry to fly through this, but the SDK, an example here, the RPC server concept. So to generate, like Node has a way of, like there's several libraries out there for doing RPCs. I chose to use one called Axon, but I modified it. And ultimately what you can do here is you can set up a server, you can set up the host that you want to talk to, and that host is actually a means of communicating across different channels, so like across your microservices. But here it just has a simple logic that says I want to create something that the end user can use in a namespace called testing, a method called echo. That's it, and this is just like the simple ping concept for this particular RPC. So you can expose whatever methods you want on the back end, and then from either the front end, meaning the UI, you could connect to it directly if you want, or you can connect to it from other microservices. And the way to do that is, sorry, I have to make this smaller. This client down here, it says let client equal new ngn.rpc.client, host of localhost, auto connect to true. And then after it connects, it listens for the connect event. It says client.testing.echo world, and it'll spit out hello world, because that's what that's what we've exposed up here. It can also expose entire node modules. So if you've already written node modules, you can do it that way. The SDK also has SSH tunneling, which is something that I find to be incredibly useful, especially if you're using databases like RethinkDB, which has no security, so you have to use firewalls to secure that. That's actually what drove a lot of this. So essentially you can set up an SSH connection, tunnel in, act as though it's a local instance. That's what this will let you do with just a couple of lines here. There's also custom exceptions. This is, exactly as a side custom exceptions. Custom logging, which we've actually done some demos on something similar in the past in Bleeding Edge Web here. But all of this stuff that I'm showing you is auto-integrated through this event bus concept. So everything talks to the bus, and then everything gets directed out from there. Finally, the IDK, I mentioned it's in Docker. This is the bridge system actually running. It automatically spins up, at the moment it's a self-signed SSL certificate to make sure that your connections are secure. That's kind of a pain in the ass, frankly, to deal with from the browser, because self-signed stuff, you're gonna get a big, ugly red warning on your screen that says, I don't trust this SSL certificate. So I'm in the process of trying to get that cycled in with Let's Encrypt, which is actually part of your trusted SSL keychain, so that you don't get those nasty errors anymore. But the point is, you just spin up a server, and now your front end, your back end, any services that you're working on, individually can talk to each other through this bridge. This tooling, I actually meant to take this slide out. This is just another screenshot of the documentation builder. And that's really about it. It's a super whirlwind of what's going on. Like I said, I've been working on this back end thing for quite a long time. The front end part has been coming together very nicely. If you're interested at all in the concepts, I'd love to have help on this anywhere that people are interested in offering it. But the repo again is github.com/ngmjs. And that's all I got on this. But again, I just wanted to share a personal project and hope that encourages others to do the same in the future. So you want to do the giveaway?
Yeah, so one last thing, we almost forgot. So Laura at the very beginning from hired.com, thanks again, hired.com. This is the box she was talking about that they give away, I guess, when people get hired through their service. And so I'm kind of tempted to just keep it. But ethically, I can't do that. So actually, what I was going to do, so we had a few cards in there, but not everyone filled them out. Not everyone has cards. So I think the fair way to do it is just through random.org. What? Hang on one sec.
Let me pull it up on here.
There, you got it. All right. So here's my super scientific way we're going to give this box away. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows, I believe. So the first, where am I? Is that you still?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, yeah, unplug that,
okay.
sorry.
There you go.
I tried to kick you off, but HDMI takes priority. Okay, so here we are, random.org. So row 1 through row 6, right?
Wait, but some rows, they only have like one person, so it means that like.
You know what, that's way
that
worse.
person's gonna win.
It's called randomness, my friend.
So I'm gonna sit here then.
No, sorry. Well, actually, you can sit there, but you already lost because we picked row 4 here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'm gonna go from that gentleman in the white shirt across. So wait, are you on row 4? You're row 3. This is so confusing. So that gentleman
You do an index zero.
1,
You
2,
got
3,
four, you got
4.
4 people.
Yeah, I'm just explaining I'm going from this side to that side. Okay. Any last good luck charms you want to pull out? Now's the time. Number 4.
All right.
Gentlemen in the glasses. Now, if you don't drink champagne.
I don't, so give it to someone else.
Oh, okay, that's between you and everyone else. I'm not going to get into all that.
Is there anything else in the box?
There's chocolate and some other stuff, so you're welcome to come check it out. And, actually, if you really don't want it, I'm sure someone would be happy to take it off your
Yeah,
hands.
I really don't, so. Thank you. I'll buy it from you.
Well, so now we can.
We gotta give it away some fair way.
Yeah, we can do like a test of strength or something. I mean, I would lose, but
Thumb wrestling?
that would be fair.
How about paper, scissors, rock?
Well, how about, okay, I got a fair way to do this. Who was on row 4 with that same gentleman?
These 3 guys right there.
Who was the third one? All right, we're doing 1 through 3.
I don't drink champagne.
So he's recused himself. Are you in?
Alright, sure. You know what, dude? You and I are just going down to the bar and drinking. That's how it's going.
There you go.
Did we have 2 people left that are interested? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, 1 and 2.
Is that hard to get with?
I know you're number 1. I don't know who number 2 was.
I
Do we
don't know if he's still here. I think
He
left.
You won. Congratulations.
Donated to you guys to put on the presentation.
Pardon me?
Just donated to you guys to put on the presentation.
We gotta go with random.org / random dot everything. Cool, thanks for coming out, guys. Thank you. Gals, do we have any gals?
Not anymore.
Pardon?
Yeah, my, it was the stores. It was the stores. So here's so the question was how can you misuse the so actions fire up dispatch.
Man, I never thought it would be so hard to give away a bottle of
I know.
When you have a store that's listening for the
I assume we gotta put all this back, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. I
calculates the data and decide at that
don't know where everyone is.
I know.
that is
Turn out.
So you guys, mind answering some React questions?
So
We can try. I'm not a super React expert because I've done some stuff with it, but not like nearly as in depth as these guys have. Well, yeah, so like we're basically in the process of kind of going down that path of doing React in our production app, but we haven't yet, so we've like done some proof of concepts.
The questions I have are probably
so
the same
if
questions
for
you're
instance
answering.
you got
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to.
servers
on it
yeah,
there.
yeah. And you decide, okay, because of the fact that this preference changed, not only do we need to update the UI, which the position there, but we also need to add storage. We might find events, say that storage.
Well, at least the YouTube people have nothing to complain about this time.
Yeah, that's right.
Since this was up the whole entire time.
Yep.
Reacting to the switch.
Next thing you know, those guys are too
And
tall.
just telling the system about it.
No, I noticed actually on the video that it was to the side of the speaker enough, like you're standing here, you can still see the whole thing. But your last set of slides was completely
I know.
illegible.
I knew that, but I didn't really care all that much. I wasn't gonna go through and redo them all.
There's not really a problem with.
You have to put all those back?
Yeah.
Basically.
Actually, clear out this back.
After those 50 no-shows.
I know, we had so many
We
RSVPs.
have 15 people on the wait list, if we're saying that you're firing on that, so that's done. Or do not. Within had a failure, right? Whatever. We're trying to use it this one.
What exactly?
Yeah.
So you should dispatch a new event, is that what you're saying? I'm sorry.
Not all of them.
You only want to go 4 calls again.
It's gonna be some serious stuff. It's not intended to. How many were actually stacked?